Hi guys, we're back to Najdorf and today we're going to be looking at F3 line, the biggest line which is called English attack. So here we are to the starting position of the Najdorf and white plays F3. Here there is a very interesting move which I want to recommend, which is not a main line, but very interesting, Queen b6. The idea of Queen b6 is to stop the dark squared bishop from developing because the b2 pawn is hanging at the moment. Mostly white goes knight b3 to cover the b file, but there is a move like a4 also to bother the queen after a5. And here we play the Najdorf type of move, e5, knight b3, bishop e6, and knight d5. Well, if not knight d5, then black just develops with knight bd7 or knight c6 and bishop e7. Knight d5, ed5, bishop f5. Bishop d3 is played mostly, but after a5 there is a very interesting move, not queen on c7, but queen d8, with the idea of bishop e3, bishop e7 and bishop g5. And we all know that to exchange dark squared bishop in this type of position, it favors black. So bishop d3, bishop d3, queen d3, knight d7. White needs to develop the bishop to castle short, so after bishop e3, queen c7 and c4. If white doesn't play c4 right now, and if he plays castle, then black does not rush to develop with bishop e7, but instead play rook c8, to put the pressure on c2 pawn and to control the c4 square as well. So queen c7, c4, bishop e7. Black naturally develops a5 to gain the space on queen side, rook c8, knight d2, protecting the c4 pawn, castles, castles, and f5. So here we have the typical position of Najdorf when black attacks on king side and white attacks on queen side. After b4 and queen d8, the position is pretty complicated, but I think that it's not worse for black and black is doing totally fine. Let's go to the main line, queen b6 and knight b3. Here, black has two main options, e6 and knight c6. What is the difference between e6 and knight c6? If e6, black gives white a lot of options, but the idea of e6 is to save the tempo on knight c6, and maybe we will need knight d7 at some point. Let's see at what point. For example, if queen e2, then queen c7, g4, which is very typical for these positions, b5, bishop e3, b4. So black saved the tempo to develop the knight and instead pushed the b pawn, knight a4 and knight bd7. So the point of e6 is to save the tempo on knight's development and develop with knight d7. Queen c4, bishop c4, and d5, e5, knight e5 was played in the game of Grishuk-Kasparov. Kasparov defeated Grishuk in a very nice way. But after e6, there is a move a4 also. knight bd7. Bishop e2. Instead of bishop e2, if a5, then queen c7, bishop e3, black just develops with bishop e7, bishop e2, castle, castle, and here we have the typical pawn advance. We see that black pieces are a bit on the back rank, 7th rank, and is not totally developed, so we need some breakthrough. Breakthrough in the center is not yet good, but what about on the queen side? b5. So if white does not accept this b5, I mean with a b6, then black just develops with bishop b7. Sometimes it might be ideas that b4 will be very unpleasant after bishop b7 and rook c8, and rook goes to d8, and black has really perfect position. But of course, a b6, knight b6. So now we see that white has a little pressure on this pawn, but black has a very good c4 square. So the main plan, of course, is to develop with bishop b7, rooks to d8 and c8, and then black will see what kind of plan he needs with knight c4 or connected with d5, which is very typical and in most cases is very good for black. So let's go to the main line of this a4. Bishop e2, bishop e7, a5, queen c7, castles, castles, and bishop f4. Bishop f4 was played in the game of Saric-Vachier-Lagrave, but of course bishop f4 is actually pins the d6 pawn, so it's actually against d5. But what about bishop e3? Also a natural development. But black here has very interesting pawn sacrifice to develop the pieces with d5. e d5, knight c5. d e6, bishop e6, and knight d4. Probably the massive exchanges on c5 is really good for black, because after king h1 the rook has to be on a1 to protect the a5 pawn, and also the files are open for black rooks. So knight d4, rook a d8, queen c1, bishop d6. Now the idea of bishop d6 is that after natural g3, bishop h3, rook d1, and there is bishop g3, which is totally good for black. But of course white can take on e6, bishop h2, king h1, knight e6, and f4. Bishop g3 with very complicated position. Well, the material is equal, but white pieces are also on e-file. The rook goes to e8, but this bishop on g3 is a bit vulnerable. So after bishop f4, black played b5, a b5, knight b6, queen d2, just rook d8, rook f d1, and here it is important what black played here, a very good move, e5, because black cannot play d5 right away because it is pinned, so black really needs e5, bishop g3 and d5. After exchanges on d5, queen c3, changed on d1, queen c3, bc3, and a5 with the idea of advancing the pawn. Bishop f2 and knight a4. It was this game against Saric Vachier-Lagrave ended in draw. But the point of e6 is that after g4, knight c6, it transposes to our main line. So it's up to you. You want to give this additional plan to white with e6 or not. So knight c6, g4, e6, and here we are to the main line, queen e2. This is the main plan. The idea is, of course, to develop with bishop e3 and castle long. So after queen c7, bishop e3, black continues with his normal plan with b5, castles and knight d7. This move is also very typical in this type of positions. Knight goes by itself on d7, not to be bothered with g5 afterwards, and then develops the other pieces. Queen f2. Now we can see that b6 square is also controlled, so knight on d7 is pretty good. And rook b8. I like here very much that black does not lose tempos on developing on the king side, for example with bishop e7 and castles, but instead he attacks on the queen side right away. King b1 is the main line, but there is a very interesting f4. Why not, right? Because white pushes on the king side, and here after b4, knight a4, there is a great move which I like very much. Actually, it's very rare idea, but this time it works very well. g5, a very strong idea. You might think that what is black doing, right? Because white wants himself to push on king side, and black opens with the g5 move. It is completely crazy. But of course, the idea of g5 is to get the e5 square under control, which means that, for example, after fg5, knight ce5, we see how strong this knight is on e5. It protects everything, attacks also, and controls many squares. So after fg5, knight c5, black is doing completely great. And after f5, with the idea to open the f-file and have a little pressure on this e6 pawn, just normal developing move, bishop e7. Also now the g5 pawn is protected. And after h4, knight ce5, black is doing totally good. Okay, it's very complicated position, but I don't really think that with the knight on e5, black can be worse. Simply look at this position. Look at the knight on a4, which is completely out of play. At some point there might be ideas of queen c6 and trapping the knight on a4. So if white has a right to play with this knight on a4, why black does not have a right to play g5 and control the e5 square afterwards? Okay, let's go back to the main line. Rook b8 and king b1. We know that king b1 is a very usual move in this type of positions. King goes to a more safe place, and there was the game, after knight ce5, Anand against Grishuk. We know that Grishuk is a very big expert of this Queen b6 line, but this time Anand defeated Grishuk. After knight ce5, rook g1, bishop e7 and f4. Now we see that f4 is with tempo. Knight c4. Of course, the idea of Grishuk with knight ce5 was to go to c4 square. Bishop a7, rook a8, and now bishop d4. b4, they exchanged on c4. Knight d2, queen c6, knight e2, e5, bishop e3, a5, knight g3. Black faced some problems. But I don't really think that after natural developments with bishop e7, Black has any problems. For example, g5, to gain the space on king's side and to start attacking with h4 and h5. Castles, h4, knight ce5. Well, now the natural move is of course h5. f4 is not so good after knight g4, so white really needs to control this square g4, but why not to push right away on the king side? h5 and knight c4 with usual plan. And now, if for example g6, after h6 I really don't see how white should continue to attack on king side, because usually this kind of structure is very good for black. It stops the attack, and of course black has his own attack on the queen side. And we know from many games that queenside attack with b4 and a5 is really dangerous for white. And if knight c4, bishop c4, then we take not with the queen but with the pawn. B takes c4, knight d4 and queen b7. It is very complicated position with the chances for both sides, but I think that black has pretty normal and good position. For now it attacks the b2 pawn and white has to defend it somehow, and afterwards I really don't see how white can continue to attack, because black has many ideas. For example, if bishop goes to c1, then white just takes the pawn on g5. So, I hope you liked the line. Of course, for detailed analysis, you should look in PGN. And thank you for watching. See you soon.